7:30 तो प्लेन निकाल दे।
Not a big one. Okay. Let's resume. Okay, resuming Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhava, a detailed biography about Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Apologia, which means formal written defense of one's opinions or conduct.
Using a sort of using the syntax of
Okay, Apologia. Within Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhava, I have incorporated limited descriptions of the underlying strife in the Gaudiya Math prior to the departure of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Yet, despite being requested by several devotees, I have not depicted the bedlam I have not depicted the confusion that later overtook the Gaudiya Matha. The general events are well known. Shortly after the passing of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, the internecine war, the fratricidal war, the war inside the family, he had foretold, broke out and shredded the institution he had worked so hard to establish. A Gaudiya essay published 4 years after his Tirobhav stated, that throughout the entire annals, historical records of the earth, such enmity as was then being shown to Vaishnavas between each other had never been heard of anywhere, let alone actually manifest against anyone. If we are not careful, a similar thing can easily happen in our organization also. It is our duty to do everything required to prevent these things. The task of restoring the dignity of the Sampradaya and undertaking Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had so ably continued after the departure of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur became largely undone, for the tremendous esteem earned from the populace quickly evaporated as they beheld sadhus openly and viciously contesting for power and property. It's very hard to earn respect, very easy to lose respect. It's a lesson for us and for all of future generations of those who claim to be followers of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. The true spirit of the Gaudiya Matha became clouded for many years by accusations and counter-accusations, factionalism, division into various factions, litigation, legal battles. Something of this sort has already happened. Scission, being cut, violence, and reportedly even murder. Some devotees were jailed by others, devotees, whatever you want to call them. And the printing press, so dear to Srila Saraswati Thakur's heart, was sold to finance subsequent court battles. Yet the minutiae, the details of that saga are unknown to virtually all contemporary recipients of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's genuine legacy. And due to the complexity of the subject, preponderance of misinformation, abundance of misinformation, and dearth, lack of reliable first-hand evidence, it is unlikely that any fully authentic, detailed account will ever manifest. Descriptions of the post-1936 Gaudiya Matha imbroglio, extremely confused, complicated, or embarrassing situation, are fraught, filled with inaccuracies and sectarian tendentiousness. They're filled with inaccuracies and also have a tendency, these descriptions have a tendency to point out we are right and those people are all wrong. The admirers and detractors, critics of sundry, various, several Gaudiya Math persons, relating impossibly contradictory versions of those individual activities. Present-day disciplic descendants of some of the most maligned, criticized associates of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati insist that their respective gurus, Parama gurus, also have been misrepresented and misunderstood, which is tenable, which is defensible, for the exalted devotional qualities of certain of those descendants indicate that their gurus were not lacking spiritual substance. So you judge a Vaishnava by looking at the disciples of those Vaishnava, or those who are later followers of that Vaishnava, or those who claim to follow that Vaishnava. So you mess up your spiritual life. You don't come up to the standard of Prabhupada or Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. They don't think your guru is substandard. Another lesson to learn for why we need to be sufficiently serious in the pathway of sadhana to attain sadhana siddhi. Moreover, that a number of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's disciples apparently performed acts unbecoming of Vaishnavas is not an indictment, is not an accusation, a criminal accusation, an indictment of His divine grace, a criminal accusation against Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who is glorious for having given diverse people the opportunity to perform devotional service. Actually, one way or another, practically all of His disciples remained in Krishna consciousness throughout their lives, and some clearly attained high levels of realization. Prabhupada is also reported to have stated this, that they maintained their Krishna consciousness. The quarrel was about preaching and how to preach and this and that. But practically speaking, the essential practices of chanting Hare Krishna, these ones, the vast majority of them, they stuck to it. It is also questionable whether our own Guru, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, would approve of explicit documentation of his god brothers' purported wrongdoings. Purported meaning, purported wrongdoing, meaning wrongdoings that they have been accused of. For while he often ascribed the coarsest motivations to some of his god brothers, nevertheless, he also sometimes praised them. And in general, Prabhupada was very respectful to his god brothers. It has been reported that even in Mayapur, when his sannyasi god brothers would come to meet with him, Prabhupada would stand up and wait till a chair or something of that nature was given to his god brothers. And when they sat, he also sat. Non basic civilized behavior. And even though undeniably some unhappy incidents were occasioned by various Gaudiya Math members, uncensored broadcasting of such disagreeable information would naturally miff their present followers, annoy their present followers, and likely exacerbate, worsen the still vitiated atmosphere, spoiled atmosphere within the Vaishnava world, which is not at all my intention. Besides, it could implicate me in offenses to devotees who likely are now in Krishna's transcendental abode. Even if the record of Gaudiya Matha infighting could be accurately circumstantiated, if it could be accurately described with evidence, publicizing it would hardly serve the cause of Vaishnavism. And while to this day the Gaudiya Matha remains irreparably dismembered, broken apart, the animosity has significantly dissipated. Occasionally we see some flames coming up here and there. Generally, it's sufficiently gone down. We can see that in Mayapur itself. Most of the Gaudiya Mathas in Navadip Mandal, along with ISKCON, we celebrate the appearance and disappearance, the appearance days of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada and Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur together. Nice Prabhu and with lectures being given by sannyasis and then prasadam being distributed. Nice. So like that, it is a good endeavor to bring everyone together. And there are other endeavors being done by other followers of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur to try to get things together. So why inflame the rancor, the bitterness of the past? Perhaps it was with this consideration that in most biographies of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, even allusions, even indications to the hostility that precipitated the later splintering of his institution have been expunged, have been thoroughly removed. In most of the biographies of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, you don't even find indications that even during his time there was some hostility between certain of his disciples, which later caused the institution to be broken into pieces. Such references are generally not there, they just removed. In that vein, I was requested by Srimad Bhakti Shobhan Shanta Maharaj to expurgate, to remove all objectionable content, to expurgate, to remove all historical information that might lead readers to directly or indirectly develop a critical and therefore offensive mentality toward devotees worshipable by subsequent generations of followers. Maharaj stated that the risk of seeking historical correctness is unjustified if in so doing our gurus are even slightly roiled. Even if they are slightly even if their image is slightly tarnished. This was his opinion. In remembering devotees, protection of the pure Siddhanta and divinity of our Parampara is more important than preservation of mere chronicle facts. It is a disservice to spread any information that even remotely suggests that previous devotees of our line were in any way questionable regarding their devotion or spiritual stature. Even though there might have been some occasional disagreements between them, it is not our business to analyze such matters. Whatever they may have done or said, we must consider them perfect and worshipable because they are situated at Srila Saraswati Thakur's lotus feet. Indeed, the less such controversial and potentially dangerous matters are quoted and discussed, the more peace and stability this would bring to Gaudiya Vaishnava society and to the devotional lives of its members. End of quotation. I replied that to withhold information of certain less relishable activities performed by disciples of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati might serve an apparently noble purpose, but would simultaneously obscure significant aspects of reality from which important lessons can be derived. In fact, in the Ramayana, in the first canto, Balakanda, there are about 15 chapters, 15 chapters, describing Vishwamitra's life. This was spoken right in the presence of Vishwamitra to Lord Ramachandra, in the presence of King Janaka and other respectable, exalted personalities. And in that description, you often come across several blunders of Vishwamitra and how ultimately he became the glorious sage Vishwamitra, Brahmarshi Vishwamitra. So lessons can be learned. If there was something wrong with that, Lord Ramachandra would have immediately stopped it. It's after all the very personification of Dharma. Dharmo Vigrahavan. Rama is the very personification of Dharma. It's important to learn lessons from mistakes that we have done and mistakes that others have done. Later, I further ruminated. I deeply thought about, ruminated that. I deeply considered that for our elucidation, Srila Vyasadeva did not refrain from disclosing some seemingly abominable acts of personalities, as venerable as Brahma and Brihaspati, or of the self-destruction of the Yadu dynasty, comparable to the Gaudiya Matha Brohaha, comparable to the noisy and overexcited response to the mess that happened, despite the possibility that such narrations would be difficult for some to digest, particularly novices, beginners, neophytes. Now keep in mind, we might be beginners for several decades also, because Shadbir Bhakti Prasiddhyati, through 6 activities you upgrade yourself. Shadbir Bhakti Vinashyati, and through 6 activities you downgrade. Or might be going up, and coming down, and then going up, and then coming down, going up, coming down, all the time. So I might be still stuck, in a very neophyte platform, even though externally I might appear to be accredited in many ways, whose fragile faith is easily shattered and could spark envious detractors, critics, to attack the very validity of Haribhakti. Besides, my own Guru Maharaj thought the disintegration of the Gaudiya Math important enough to explicitly mention it in his books, to which he ascribed the highest authority. He mentioned it in his purport to Chaitanya Charitamrita. If he deemed to criticize anyone, surely it was not without reason. Although some argue that his barbs, his attacks, his criticisms about particular God brothers were meant for a specific time and circumstance that is now moot, that is not relevant to us right now, or that is debatable right now. I surmise that he did not want the history of the Gaudiya Matha to be idealized almost to the point of fiction. Reality is reality. You have to know about it. Even about ISKCON's own history after Prabhupada's departure. It's important to know and learn to avoid the mistakes that have taken place in the past. Anyone who joins the Saraswata Parampara, the Parampara descending from Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, will before long learn that Srila Saraswati Thakur's institution became divided and subdivided by internal conflict, with the resulting diaspora, resulting collection of all these different groups, remaining factious and fissiparous. They remained as factions, and in fact, they had the tendency to break down further and further and further. We might better serve our acharyas by acknowledging and accommodating such unpalatable facts rather than dressing them as lila or pretending that they never happened. One way or another, newcomers soon learn not only of our hardly flawless past, but also of present-day misadventures. So perhaps it is circumspect to train beginners to adjust to experiential reality without losing faith in the essence and ideal. Just as many devotees continue to serve in an ISKCON whose downsides and failings are not only obvious, but widely broadcast to the world. Specifically, since we are living, and that is even more so within ISKCON, because ISKCON is a joint family. In a nuclear family, in a place like India, where children are trained to respect their parents. You will not be easily allowed to hear criticism of your parents, especially when you're a child. But in a joint family, that happens all the time. Because your parents are not the great gods that you might imagine them to be. But still you're trying to respect and obey them wherever they're correct, whenever they're correct. I have myself been trained, and there are hundreds and thousands of people who have been brought up like that. In even semi-joint families, not even full-fledged joint families. So like that, within ISKCON, we get to hear. We may tend to imagine great things about devotees with whom we have particular types of relationships. But this is a reality you cannot avoid, and that too, this is the age of information. You send one voice message and bang, from one continent to another, it's gone already. And then that can easily go off here, there, here, there, here, there. So you cannot just avoid reality. You cannot avoid reality, specifically in places where, in holy dhams, for instance, there are devotees attracted to the dhams come from various, they may be disciples initiated or instructed by various different Vaishnavas. But they all have a common interest in a particular holy place. So you get used to life. You get used to it. You get used to it. Of course, we have to ensure that we don't unnecessarily commit mistakes and avoid whatever has been presented by Rupa Goswami and his liberated followers. Whatever they have described as offense of any nature to be avoided. But there are instances when we make mistakes, and sometimes our worshipable superiors also make mistakes. And when you live in a multi-guru society, you get to hear these things. These are things that happen, not just gurus, authorities or various types. You get to hear these things, and from that, it is important that we derive the right type of lessons in order to progress in Krishna consciousness, and in order to improve the preaching of Krishna consciousness also. My teacher, Sri Vidvan Prabhu, he said that during Prabhupada's time, ISKCON was in Tamoguna. And gradually over the decades, it came to the point of, it upgraded to the point of Rajoguna. It was approaching Rajoguna, actually, he said. And therefore, in different modes of material nature, you value different things. In Rajoguna, you value money, you value big structures, you value fame, you value reputation, you value these kind of things. And when Gopi Brahman was manifest, he said this. He said, see, right now, we value these kind of things. These devotees who can get these things done, they are considered great devotees. And he said, Prabhupada from the background, Prabhupada was guiding devotees during his manifest presence, and even later, Prabhupada is guiding us. He's guiding the entire movement from the background to move up further, further, further. And within a few decades, ISKCON will start valuing more and more sattvic things which are in Sattva. And that will certainly happen. It will certainly happen. So as we progress over time also, we begin to retrospectively analyze what happened in the past. Why did they think like this? And should we just blindly just accept it? Or Is it time to upgrade? Whether such a concept of upgrade is in line with Prabhupada's teachings, the teachings of the predecessor Acharya, the Shastra, all of that will be verified repeatedly. They'll be checked, verified. All of this will happen. And for that, we need to become mature enough to understand what was right, what was wrong. And yet, respect everyone to the degree Krishna wants us to respect them. Whose downsides and failings are not only obvious but widely broadcast to the world. To pretend that anomalies cannot occur within Vaishnava society would be an injustice to truth. Notwithstanding that Vaishnava culture prescribes deep respect for elders, if applied blindly or merely euphemistically, such protocol is surely unrealistic and impractical, even when directed toward otherwise worshipable superiors. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he says in Chaitanya Shikshamrita, it is not that whatever the gurus and other authorities, whatever the gurus, referring to various authorities, including initiating, instructing, exalted superiors, it's not that whatever they say the dependents are meant to do. If they say something wrong, then with humility, one should, without insulting them, one should ensure that these activities, these wrong instructions are stopped. And we notice, even in the scriptures, when great souls, when they tell their disciples something wrong, the disciple is duty bound to actually not do what is wrong. They're supposed to, in fact, correct their superior, if it is possible. It is possible. But these things are done in a very careful manner amongst those who are sufficiently self-disciplined. And not some, as long as we are slaves to Vacho Vegam, Manasa Krodha Vegam, Jikva Vegam, Adropastha Vegam. There's no question of these kind of things. In fact, the first 3 verses of Upadeshamrita deal with Shraddha. Until we pass through that, we will not be capable of executing the next 3 instructions of Rupa Goswami, which deal with Sadhu Sangha. That is where we are trained how to deal with Vaishnavas at different levels of Krishna consciousness. So, it's a matter of basic training to come to the mode of goodness and then progress further. Thus, I decided to summarily and guardedly mention a few seemingly less becoming aspects of the pre-1937 Gaudiya Math. Yet I thank Srimad Shanta Maharaj for his observations and devotional insights, which prompted me to review and revise this manuscript, to maintain a reserved tenor, to maintain a reserved explicit mood or voice. Okay. How do I explain it? Okay. Here, tenor, sense, the general tenor of the debate. But a very reserved set of wordings in deference to my spiritual uncles and in hope of avoiding endless muckraking, endless mudslinging, simply trying to scandalize others, to withhold names and descriptions of several less toward incidents. After all, it is the activity or attitude that is wrong. It's not the individual, because the individual might later regret and correct himself. So there's no point in saying this individual is wrong. It is that activity or the attitude or both which might have been wrong. Especially those concerning devotees who later accepted disciples, since their disciplined descendants would undoubtedly be sorrowed by such narratives. Let us survey with prudence, with care, not prudishness, not by unnecessarily being disturbed. Sensitive or paradoxical topics concerning Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and his associates, bearing in mind that a guru's censure or even ostracism means you reject, of certain disciples does not necessarily mean they are no longer recipients of his mercy. Even if some of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's disciples are perceived as deviated, their having been once favored by him was surely not in vain, was not useless. Nor are their subordinates justified to harp on such criticism. So those subordinates, they are not justified in pointing out, see, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he criticized them. He himself did this, he himself did this. Not like that. Not like that. Leave it. There's no need to repeatedly talk about something that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur does not want us to talk about. Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhava also touched on several embroilments, several arguments, controversies stemming from Srila Saraswati Thakur's disdain, appropriate expression he has used. Disdain means the feeling that somebody is unworthy of respect. Srila Saraswati Thakur's disdain of other Vaishnavas, albeit, despite the fact that some contemporary devotees similarly give opinion that such details should not be publicized. But with our, nevertheless, apart from all of this, I chose to discuss these controversial issues because they are valuable for understanding the ethos surrounding Srila Saraswati Thakur and are instructive signposts in tackling contentious ecclesiastical matters even of today. They're very valuable to help us understand how to deal with various controversial issues pertaining to how to go about the organized implementation of Krishna consciousness, even today. There's a difference between organized implementation of Krishna consciousness and just freelancing implementation of Krishna consciousness. And there'll be plenty of opinions about that. But from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's behavior, we get some clear pointers on how to deal with these kind of issues. Nevertheless, disagreements between genuine devotees are of no permanent relevance. And while the Gaudiya Matha may appear to have been merely another religious movement that first dazzled and then fizzled, we should ensure that we don't end up being a movement that future historians say that they also dazzled and then fizzled. The really important history of Srila Saraswati Thakur and the Gaudiya Matha is the undying spiritual contribution they gave to the world. Hence, although compiling of history, especially recent events, is typically fraught with political slant, even though when we write history, we do it on the basis of some political perspective, I have essayed to do so with solely devotional considerations. Not every reader will like everything written here. Indeed, to compose a factual biography of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati that all would fully approve is probably not possible. I've tried to present his pastimes in a manner both devotional and congruent with history, both devotional and compatible with historical accounts, and have provided extensive quotations with references to enable cross-checking against original sources. This is a standard scholarship. You have to allow the reader to cross-check against original sources. Not that you think your readers are idiots. They're unfit. There's no need for me to help them cross-check against the original sources. Not like that. Give the benefit of a doubt to your readers. Give all these things. For those who are very learned, research-oriented, more intelligent, give them facilities to verify for themselves whether our claims are correct or incorrect. Still, this book may be considered hagiography. Hagiography means, okay, here, a biography that treats its subject with undue reverence. So still, there may be some who think that, oh, there's a biography about a saint written by someone with overwhelming over-respect, exaggeration, rather than impartial study. But for its principal purpose, it's not scholastic exactitude. But the prime purpose behind writing this is not simply to be exact and accurate like a scholar, but to convey the instructions and mood of an acharya for the benefit of devotees aspiring to follow in his footsteps. I do not pretend to be neutral. Who can be, especially in matters sacred? And have written not from a supposedly non-judgmental ethic standpoint. Ethic is, you describe a culture in a very gentle way, but as a decidedly emic. This is another way of describing a culture. You describe it in the way that culture describes itself, but as a decidedly emic, disciplined follower of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and more specifically as a disciple of his foremost disciple, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, according to the values they inculcated. Pure devotion, service to Krishna is absolute and perfect. All else is imperfect and indeed condemnable. This is specifically the mood of Prabhupada and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Even if it is authorized by the predecessor acharyas, even if it is authorized in Shastra, these two acharyas took this stand. If it is not pure devotion, service to Krishna, then we'll criticize it. In many cases, my apparent criticism of others is not merely echoing that of my acharyas, but is directly extracted from original sources. Nevertheless, some will object that I have been unduly harsh, and perhaps others will protest that I was overly mild. Sarva chitta nari aradhite. For me to satisfy everyone is not possible. From Chaitanya Charitamrita 2.2.85. In this book, references from Chaitanya Bhagavata and Chaitanya Charitamrita are given like this. They are not two. The first two indicates it is Madhya Leela. Chaitanya Charitamrita is given to Adi Leela, Madhya Leela, Antya Leela. In BBT, we write Adi, Madhya, Antya. But here it is chosen to represent it with numbers. Bowing my head at the lotus feet of all devotees, I beg their lenity, their leniency. I pray to them to become kind, gentle, and forgiveness for any offenses I have made while undertaking this difficult task. May the Saragrahi, Vaishnavas, Saragrahi, an expression repeatedly used by Thakur Bhaktivinoda. Saragrahi means essence seeker, one who seeks the essence, like a bee which seeks honey from a flower. We are meant to accept only that which is essential and reject everything that which is non-essential for our spiritual progress. May the Saragrahi Vaishnavas accept the essence of this work and overlook its faults. Sarva Vaishnaver Paye Kori Namaskar, Ithe Aparad Kichu Nahuk Amar. I offer homage to at the feet of all Vaishnavas so that I may not commit any offenses to them. Editorial notes. Often recent events are reported differently by individual witnesses, and thus only well-organized and expert investigation can verify the actual details of such recollections. So what to speak of matters that occurred over 70 years before, especially if received second or third hand or even further removed. Even the best researched historical portrayals are necessarily simplifications and approximations of complex events and exchanges, and hence are liable to contain errors. The empiric historical method always apprehends the possibility of erroneous observation of an occurrence, even on the part of an actual and careful observer. Where is that from? Is that from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur himself? Yeah, Harmonist, 1931. It is the bane of agiology. It is a cause of great distress or annoyance in describing a saint, and perhaps all historiography, and in the writing of various histories, all histories, that exaggeration, interpolation, myth, personal angles, prejudices, confabulations, fabricate imaginary experiences as compensation for loss of memory, and calculated distortions tend to merge with or supplant facts. Either they merge with facts or they replace facts. This is particularly so regarding some of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's disciples, about whom various controversies have led to widely differing reports of their activities, which I became obligated to attempt to reconcile. Then again, it is not unusual that in people's memories, and thus also in biographical accounts, particulars of discrete individuals become intermixed. A particular individual, each individual is independent of each other, but you mix up things, whereby similarities in certain sadhus' lives lead to anecdotes of one being ascribed to another. Several times, disciples of Srila Saraswati Thakur guilelessly, innocently, non-deceptively narrated to me anecdotes about him that they stated to have personally witnessed, but that I later discovered to be about various of his sannyasi disciples. Similarly, dates of several incidents involving Srila Saraswati Thakur, especially those from his early life, are recorded variously, sometimes with considerable disparity, sometimes with considerable difference. Hence, in preparing this book, I was sometimes faced with tangles of contradictions, various contradictions, one after another, and chronological impossibilities, and therefore was obliged to exercise discretion. I was obliged to use my intelligence in choosing what to include or to reject as improbable, retaining only that which seemed most authorized, appropriate, and in consonance with the character of this extraordinary Guru. Naturally, I generally accorded greater legitimacy to old printed records than to recent or oral sources. Oral source means simply through word of mouth. Especially all that was printed during Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's manifest presence is particularly valuable due to being enriched by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's characteristically deep philosophical explanations, the details of which his contemporary biographers were mindful to record. Given that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati paid keen attention to his disciples' writings, mostly published in magazines, and that the writers and producers of his magazines were highly qualified and faithful to Bhaktisiddhanta Vani, the teachings of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and that many articles were drafted at Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's specific behest, specifically because he requested. Many of those articles were drafted or directly based on his katha or directly based on something that he spoke. I have accorded authoritativeness to such writings as if they had been composed by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati himself. However, even old published documentation can be inaccurate or incomplete to the extent that apparently some entire noteworthy incidents in Srila Saraswati Thakur's life were hitherto deliberately never featured in print. Nonetheless, the nigh inevitability of errors and inconsistencies in recorded anecdotes does not necessarily invalidate them. Still, even though it is almost inevitable that there are errors and inconsistencies and anecdotes about Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur that have appeared in record, meaning in print. Still, one cannot conclude that they are necessarily invalid. As His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada said to an artist disciple who was minutely questioning him about the scene described in his books, we are not archaeologists. The same principle applies to this endeavor. We are not historians in the academic sense. Still, having had this manuscript thoroughly reviewed by two scholarly devotees, conversant with the teachings of its founder, I am confident that the reportage, the collection of reports that is presented in this book, is free of gaps. It is free of it appears to me that it will be difficult. It is free of social or diplomatic blunders. Although at the time of publishing, few points remained unresolved and references to some cited text were still unfound. So the point is that it is not, this biography is not, at least it's not intentionally written with a particular social or political or diplomatic purpose. Hopefully, any discrepancies will eventually be corrected through further perusal by myself or others of the magazines produced by the Gaudiya mission during the manifest presence of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Although unfortunately that vast trove is nowadays largely unread by and unknown even to most of his discipular followers, most of the Saraswata Gaudiya Vaishnavas, they don't even read these things. It is worth for those who are obedient to His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada and have read all of his books and who have dedicated their lives to the service of Prabhupada and his predecessors. It is worth learning Bengali. Read Siddhanta Saraswati, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and the predecessors who wrote in Bengali, as was obviously done by devotees from whom anecdotes were extracted. Occasionally, I too paraphrased or added explanatory words into recorded speech to elucidate the speaker's intent. And in a few cases of incomplete or unclear evidence, I ventured to extrapolate the apparent meaning without introducing yarns befitting a biographical novel. Because the terrestrial activities of even transcendently situated persons must be considered in relation to the milieux. It should be considered in reference to the social environment in which they appear and interact. This book offers asides, use some side information on customs, practices, and attitudes within traditional Hindu society and on religious, social, and political trends, especially in Bengal in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. While many of these cultural traits remain extant today, herein they are discussed in the past tense. And because of the limited compass of this work, they should be taken as generalizations. In researching these topics, I consulted some secular academic sources despite being wary of their prevalent anti-devotional tilt. And since Bengali and Oriya culture are cognate, both are having the same origin, you can say. They're connected. What is stated about the culture of Bengal may be understood as broadly applicable also to that of Orissa. I have treated philosophical and polemical issues only summarily, for comprehensive analysis would necessitate supplementary volumes. The coverage of diverse Upasampradayas not only underscores Srila Saraswati Thakur's mordant opposition to them, he opposed them very sharply, critically, but additionally provides pertinent insights, important insights, relevant insights into perennial deviations within the Vaishnava world. Many of these are constant deviations within the Vaishnava world. Yet being a summary, it is far from a definitive delineation of the innumerable varieties, nuances, and there are also different subtle differences of belief and practice in the Upasampradayas. Much of the material presented in this work was derived from spoken or written Bengali, having undergone inevitable alteration through translation. The English renditions necessarily fail to convey the full flavor and depth of the original, particularly Srila Saraswati Thakur's extraordinarily rich, incisive, sharp, and forceful language defies satisfactory transposition into English. It is practically impossible to satisfactorily convert into English the Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's usage of words, which are extraordinarily rich in vocabulary, sharp in their presentation, and forceful in presenting his ideas. From transcriptions of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati speaking, it seems that he often quoted Sanskrit without giving translations, which suggests that his listeners were capable of comprehending those citations. He's talking to a scholarly audience. In reproducing such cases, I have provided English renditions. I've provided English renditions of those Sanskrit portions, anticipating that most readers will meet them. Many translations of verses, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's commentaries are from the books of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada or other BVT publications. Some are from the Harmonist Journal. Others are redacted or extracted from Bengali translations of Sanskrit verses or of commentaries given by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati or his disciplic descendants, and some are by myself or my contemporaries. Some translations from BVT publications have been altered, and other verses or passages that appear in BVT books have been newly translated, either as contextually required or to more closely resemble the translations of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati from which they are derived. Similarly, certain citations of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada spoken words and letters, some source materials already translated by others from Bengali to English, and several other passages from English language sources have been amended, they have been modified for ease of reading and to conform with the overall style of this book. So they have been reworked sometimes, just to make it easy to read, to make sure they're in line with the conventions of grammar and so on. Nonetheless, to preserve and demonstrate their idiom and flavor, most excerpts from the Harmonist and other English writings from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's time are presented largely unedited, yet with some revisions of punctuation, addition of diacritical marks, and italicization, spelling converted to American English, and lower casing of many capital letters. They would use even relative pronouns referring to the Supreme Lord with the title caps. Krishna, who is the Supreme Being? So who, they would put it in capital W. But Prabhupada preferred using lowercase as much as possible, except for personal pronouns, he, him, for Krishna, or for Radharani, she, her. In general, Prabhupada preferred lowercase. Most of the Sanskrit and Bengali words in this book are followed within parentheses, round brackets, by English equivalents, and many are further explained in the glossary. English transliteration of Sanskrit and Bengali script is rendered according to the diacritical system used by BBT, a guide to which is included in the back matter of each volume of Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhava. In some cases, phonetical adjustments have been made to Sanskrit words used in Bengali. For instance, rendering Vimala as Bimala. In Bengali, there is no V. There's no V for victory. There is only B. B for boy. This is one particular Vedic tradition where the letters Ba and Va are used interchangeably. Bengali caught on to that particular tradition. And Yadumani as Jadumani, and therefore we have Jati Shekhar, this Yati Shekhar. But some adjustments have been made to help us pronounce the way the Bengalis would pronounce them. Vimala Prasad, that's non-Bengali Sanskrit pronunciation. Also included in each volume is a guide to obscure English words to aid readers who are not familiar with the many uncommon words herein, employed to reflect Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's highbrow literary style. So his style was like this. He was dealing with intellectuals, and therefore his language was also that of an intellectual. The appendixes include a guide to Bengali months and dates. Generally, Gregorian dates are used, which means Gregorian dates are the regular Christian dates that we use. But in cases wherein sources quote only the Bengali year, that has been given, since Bengali years straddle the Gregorian. Unless the exact month is specified, the corresponding Gregorian year cannot be definitively ascertained. The Bengali years don't match with the Gregorian years. The Bengali New Year does not match with the Christian New Year. So therefore, when it says this is the Bengali year so and so, it's not easy to say which Christian year that would have been unless we know the month and so on. Herein, the term Vedic is used in the broad sense employed by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada to indicate the culture, ethos, and literature stemming from and based not only on the four Vedas but also connate texts, also based on related texts, texts which are born from the Vedas, especially the Puranas, Ramayana and Mahabharata. The term Vaishnava is employed contextually, usually denoting a Gaudiya lineage or a committed devotee thereof, or to a committed devotee in a Gaudiya disciplic line, considered bona fide by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Yet it sometimes indicates any Orthodox Vaishnava Sampradaya, or a member thereof, or a member of some Orthodox Vaishnava Sampradaya. Orthodox Vaishnava Sampradaya refers to four Vaishnava lines. It may also refer to the broad social genre in Bengal known as Vaishnava, but which, according to Bhaktisiddhanta Vani, was considered deviated from Shuddha Vaishnava Dharma. There is also this Hindu conception of who is a Vaishnava. Brahmana, Guru, and Sadhu are other terms used contextually to indicate either genuine worthy possessors of such titles or persons merely conventionally accepted as such. Sometimes the word Brahmana refers to one who has the guna and karma of a Brahmana as found in Shastra. So it is with Guru or Sadhu. Sometimes Brahmana just refers to a person who is born in a Brahmin family and who is identified as a Brahmin by regular social convention, this ordinary non-devotee convention. Similarly, a guru is, if somebody accepts somebody as his guru, and it is a convention to refer to the initiating spiritual master in general as one's guru, then that convention is sometimes followed in this book. Similarly, a mendicant is conventionally referred to as a sadhu. He may not have the qualities of a sadhu stated in Srimad Bhagavatam, but he's conventionally referred to as sadhu. So sometimes the word sadhu is also used in this way. Some excellently written pieces from previous English biographical writings about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati are blended almost verbatim with the content of this book. Extracts from His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada's writings are copyrighted by the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust International Incorporated. Nearly all cited letters of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati are from Srila Prabhupada. Their Patravali, a famous book in the Saraswata Gaudiya Vaishnava circles. 2 volumes, if I remember correctly. To avoid repetition and unnecessary increment, unnecessary addition of this word, unnecessary addition to this word, I have not included the many pastimes of Srila Saraswati Thakur with his guru that are recorded in the booklet Babaji Maharaj, Two Beyond Duality, Lives of the Vaishnava Acharyas, Volume 3 by Karnamrita Das Adhikari, New Jaipur Press, 1990. Maybe I should also include discussion about, I should use this book, Babaji Maharaj, maybe, after Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhava. Maybe. There are three great souls actually. One is Srila Gauranga Das Babaji Maharaj. Another is one Vamshi Das Babaji Maharaj, who was very exalted. We'll come across him in this book itself a little bit. But there's another book, nice book about him. And Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj. I think I should include that. It will be useful in Parampara-VAIBHAVA. Diacritical marks are featured in most Indian names, whether of persons or places. Non-diacriticized forms are used where considered appropriate. Goswami notice the W, is used in reference to caste Goswamis. There's a caste called Goswami. And also in some proper names. There are some persons whose name is Goswami. The person may be a married person, but he has a surname Goswami. Goswami. Goswami, notice the V instead of the W. For genuine Goswamis, those who have mastered their senses and mind. Some toponyms, names of places, are written in anglicized forms. Some of the names of places are given in spellings that the Britishers gave, current during the Raj period, and are listed in the appendixes with their present equivalents. In Gaudiya Matha publications, withheld names were denoted by a series of asterisk stars, and these have been retained in excerpts quoted in this book. I have employed the unorthodox but readily understandable compounds birth caste, birth site, conch shell, guru shell, and law book, as well as non-hyphenated, non-devotee, and non-different, and worshipable. And while all right is still not all right in the estimation of orthographers who decide such matters, I have used it nonetheless. Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhava features many photos taken from Gaudiya Matha publications that were over 70 years old, most of which were hitherto largely unknown to the present Vaishnava world. Several of the captions are direct translations of or derived from the Bengali originals. photos with no caption either originally had none, or the originals conveyed dubious, irrelevant, or very little information. For instance, just giving the name of Srila Saraswati Thakur, apart from the touch-up of a portrait of Srila Saraswati Thakur, all of the color photographs featured herein were shot within 3 years prior to the first printing of this book. E-book edition. With the advent of widely disseminated e-books, it is inevitable and apt, appropriate that Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhava be presented in this format. Surely Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who always desired that Harikatha be broadcast by the most effective media, would have been as enthusiastic about e-books as he was for utilization of the printing press. Nomenclature, naming, as is common in Vedic culture, Srila Saraswati Thakur had several names and titles. In childhood, he was known as Bimala Prasad. He who was received as the mercy of Bimala Devi. Bimala Devi is the internal potency of Jagannath manifested as a form of Durga in his temple at Puri. Gaudiyas, meaning Gaudiya Vaishnavas. Consider her an expansion of the Gopi, Bimala, the overseer of Kamyavan forest of Vrajmandal. Another significance of this name is that Jagannath's Prasad, food remnants, is offered to the deity Bimala, after which it is called Mahaprasad. Only then is it distributed to the public. So just as Jagannath's Prasad mercy is available only through Bimala Devi and is thus received with enhanced quality, the mercy of Jagannath in the form of Bhakti Siddhanta and Bhakti Vinod is available only from Shri Bimala Prasad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. So the mercy of Lord Jagannath in the form of the conclusions of Bhakti and the delight that comes out of Bhakti is only available from Shri Bimala Prasad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. At age 15, he was awarded the title Shri Siddhanta Saraswati for excellence in Jyotish. Jyotish. In modern Indian languages, Jyotish is generally understood to mean astrology of a more predictive nature. Yet the complete Vedic science of Jyotisha includes both astronomy and astrology. Vedic astronomy was based on Shastriya, scriptural descriptions rather than observation, and was primarily meant to facilitate astrology, a discipline having far greater scope than that commonly ascribed to it or understood nowadays. It appears that Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's interest in mathematics and astronomy was linked mainly to a scientific interest in the nature of the universe and in the practical application to the calendar rather than in analytic or predictive astrology. In Vedic astronomy, Siddhanta refers to an established canonical textbook. An established textbook which is accepted as the standard. Saraswati is the goddess presiding over Aparavidya. Saraswati is the name of the goddess who presides over material knowledge, material Vedic knowledge, knowledge particularly that of Shastra pertaining to the material state. Sri Siddhanta Saraswati lived up to his appellation. He lived up to his name by demonstrating divinely inspired erudition, learning, in defining principles of Jyotish, even by defying the orthodoxy of that science and shattering its hallowed misconceptions. He even pointed out various misconceptions which were considered to be axiomatic. He pointed out how they were wrong. On another level, the name Siddhanta Saraswati indicates a timeless intrinsic attribute of the Amaranthine saint. Place of the old English meaning of this. Undying saint whom it adorns, whose excellence lies in explaining Bhakti Siddhanta, the conclusion of devotion service, rather than Jyotisha. Perhaps those who conferred upon this great sadhu the title Siddhanta Saraswati attained a fortune comparable to that of the demigod Agni, who apparently presented to Krishna his eternal Sudarshan weapon. So Siddhanta Saraswati indicates that he is extremely learned in the conclusions concerning devotional service. At some point during youth, Vimala Prasad adopted the name Sri Varshabhanavi Dayita Das, the servant of the lover of Srimati Radharani, the daughter of Maharaj Vrishabhanu. At least from the late 1890s, he used this name in correspondence, yet was still known to most by his other two names. Shortly after Sri Vimala Prasad's spiritual initiation by Srila Gauranga Das Babaji in 1901, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur added the word Bhakti to the apparently academic title Siddhanta Saraswati, who thus was sometimes referred to as Sri Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's conferring the name Bhakti Siddhanta was in line with the then in vogue practice, the then famous practice among Vaishnavas to bestow titles beginning with Bhakti. Bhakti Siddhanta became the norm for addressing Sri Siddhanta Saraswati when upon taking sannyas at 44 he became Sri Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami. So when he became a sannyasi, he became Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami. Before that, he was already Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. Before that, he was Siddhanta Saraswati. The title Bhakti Siddhanta indicates that the summum bonum of all scriptural deliberations is pure devotional service to Sri Krishna. Siddhanta refers to the final conclusion of a Vedic doctrine established on the basis of Shastra and in refutation of the theories of other Vedic schools. And Shuddha Saraswati is the presiding goddess of Paravidya, the spiritual knowledge of Shastra, whose blessing is manifest not merely in book learning, but in realization, grasp of subtleties, resolution of seeming contradictions and other perplexing points, power of composition, ability to impart learning to others, and all other facets of a genuinely accomplished scholar. The scholars are meant to do all these things. Teachers of Shastra are expected to not only develop various qualities of a Brahmana, but also have these abilities, have all of these capabilities. Of course, nobody is expecting that they are meant to be like Saraswati Thakur. That is impossible. But they are meant to be. This cannot be zero. Therefore, the prefix Bhakti revealed the true purport of the name Siddhanta Saraswati. For Bhakti is indeed the ultimate doctrine of Vedic lore. It's indeed the ultimate teaching of the Vedic corpus of knowledge, the Vedic body of knowledge, as revealed through the brilliance of Shuddha Saraswati, the pure Saraswati, the spiritual Saraswati. Present as Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, who was unparalleled in knowing and making known Bhakti Siddhanta, the conclusions of Bhakti. As Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati pointed out, any activity devoid of Bhakti Siddhanta is antipathetic to Shuddha Bhakti. Antipathetic means it is unfavorable to Shuddha Bhakti. Don't promote anything which is not in line with Shuddha Bhakti, because if you present anything which is, it is automatically unfavorable to Shuddha Bhakti. It is with and by the Bhakti Siddhanta intrinsic to his being that he cut to pieces all apasiddhantas, false conclusions, and established Shuddha Bhakti Siddhanta. Bhakti Siddhanta is also an important term in the Madhva Sampradaya. Yet from the Gaudiya perspective, its deepest purport is synonymous with that of Rupanuga. For Sri Rupa is the Rasachari, and to please Lord Chaitanya, Rasa must be in accord with the Siddhanta presented by Sri Rupa in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Here's a quote from Chaitanya Charitamrita. Rasabhas hoy jyoti Siddhanta virod, sohite na pare Prabhu mone hoy krodh. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would not tolerate and would become angry about presentations in which transcendental mellows overlapped in a manner contrary to the principles of Bhakti Siddhanta. His non-difference, meaning Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati's non-difference from Saraswati, was evident in this non-stop Harikatha. For the goddess Saraswati is also known as Vani or Bak, both meaning speech or message. And in a Shuddha, pure manifestation is Harikatha. Vidya Vadhu Jivanam. That Vidya is the spiritual Vidya. The Vedas teach both material and spiritual. They present both information about the material world and about the spiritual world. So that which those teachings of the Vedas that give us information about the spiritual world, they are what are referred to as pure Harikatha, perpetually manifesting on Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's tongue. Shuddha Saraswati empowered his words with the potency and sweetness of the spiritual energy. In an address during a Vyasa Puja festival, Srila Saraswati Thakur himself indicated his identity with Shuddha Saraswati. On Gaura Shukla Panchami, the 5th day of the bright fortnight of Magha, the day of Saraswati Puja, children perform worship for the sake of gaining materialistic knowledge, Aparavidya. And we, members of the Gaudiya Math, offer such worship through the hand of Vyasa to the goddess of spiritual knowledge, Paravidya, on the day of the dark fortnight of Magha, Krishna Shukla Panchami, which was the day of Srila Saraswati Thakur's Vyasa Puja. To express that he is Saraswati manifested as the Vani, the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Dev, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Disciples of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati would sometimes refer to him as Gaura Saraswati and Chaitanya Saraswati. The personified message of Gauranga, the personified message of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. That Vani, Rupa Raghunatha Vani, Rupanaga Vani, Amnaya Vani is Bhaktisiddhanta. So that teaching, meaning that teaching of Rupa Goswami and Raghunath Das Goswami, that teaching of the followers of Rupa Goswami, that teaching of the Vedic discipline successions is the conclusions, the set of conclusions pertaining to devotion service to Krishna's lotus feet. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati substantiated his name by working intensely to establish unalloyed Bhakti Siddhanta, countering on multiple fronts innumerable ill-conceived theories of humanity, to confirm the supremacy of actual devotional service as opposed to pseudo-devotional and overtly anti-devotional fallacies and malpractices. So when he saw pseudo-devotional activities or attitudes, or when he saw pseudo-devotion means you're presenting something as being Krishna conscious, Vaishnava, and when in reality it is non-Vaishnava. Or sometimes when he saw directly, explicitly it is non-Vaishnava. Directly they say, yes, these things have nothing to do with your Krishna consciousness. In both cases, he opposed it on the basis of scripture when that was relevant, or on the basis of mere logic when that was relevant. This was an important service to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who felt pain to hear anything against Bhaktisiddhanta. Bhaktisiddhanta Viruddha or Rasabhas. Shunite na hoye Prabhu chitter ulas. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was never pleased to hear either statements contradicting Bhaktisiddhanta or Rasabhas. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu could not tolerate any statement that went against the teachings, the conclusions of Bhakti. Nor could he accept overlapping, that which involved overlapping of Prema Bhakti Rasa. That comes in nectar devotion. Let me just find this and explain it. Nice. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was never pleased to hear books or verses opposed to the conclusive statements of devotional service. The Lord did not like hearing rasabhas, the overlapping of transcendental mellows. So, anything which opposed the conclusive statements about the science of devotional service and overlapping of transcendental mellows, these did not bring about jubilation in the heart of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Bhaktisiddhanta Viruddha refers to that which is against the principle of unity in diversity, philosophically known as Achintya Bheda Bheda. Simultaneous oneness and difference, whereas Rasabhas is something that may appear to be a transcendental mellow but actually is not. Those who are pure Vaishnavas should avoid both these things opposed to devotional service. These misconceptions practically parallel the Mayavada philosophy. If one indulges in Mayavada philosophy, he gradually falls down from the platform of devotional service. By overlapping mellows, rasabhas, one eventually becomes a prakrita sahajiya and takes everything to be very easy. One may also become a member of the Baul community and gradually become attracted to material activity. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has therefore advised us to avoid Bhaktisiddhanta Viruddha and Rasabhas. In this way, the devotee can remain pure and free from all harm. Everyone should try to remain aloof from Bhaktisiddhanta Viruddha and Rasabhas. And not only was this remarkable devotee known by the name Bhaktisiddhanta, but his form, qualities, activities, mission, genuine associates, and indeed his very being were all fully permeated by Bhaktisiddhanta. Was completely within all of this and non-different from Bhaktisiddhanta and the conclusions of Bhakti. His sole purpose was to live by and propagate Bhaktisiddhanta, the conclusions pertaining to Bhakti, the ultimate degree of which is comprehensible only to a devotee whose inner identity is Varshabhanavi Dayata Das. Ultimately, it can only be understood by one who is a servant of one who has been blessed by the daughter of King Vrishabhanu. Upon being decorated with the title Prabhupada in 1924, he was thereafter known as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada. His disciples usually referred to him as Srila Prabhupada, or less formally simply as Prabhupada. They also called him Srila Saraswati Thakur, and chiefly in writing, Srila Paramahamsa Thakur. In English, both in speech and writing, his name was sometimes preceded by the honorific, His Divine Grace, which also was used alone to refer to him. During his time, His Divine Grace was used only for him. Throughout his life, he mostly signed his name Sri Siddhanta Saraswati. This is actually Sri Siddhanta Saraswati, Bengali script. When writing in English after having taken sannyas, he would sign Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. Although according to former Gaudiya usage, the title Prabhupada could be used for any Acharya and was commonly attributed to caste Goswamis and others in the role of Guru by the respective followers. Within the Gaudiya Matha, nearly all disciples of Srila Saraswati Thakur considered that this term should be solemnly reserved for him alone. Notwithstanding, today his most famous disciple, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, is also known worldwide as Srila Prabhupada. To avoid confusion, in this book, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur in his pre-sannyas period is referred to as Siddhanta Saraswati, and in his post-sannyas pastimes as either Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati or Srila Saraswati Thakur. Only in direct quotations of persons speaking or writing about him is he referred to as Srila Prabhupada. And His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada is primarily identified as such, or in anecdotes prior to his sannyas as Abhaida, the name he was commonly known by that time. Da is respectful. Abhaida means the respected Abhay. In accordance with the Vedic cultural standard, especially in formal usage, honorific prefixes have been placed before many personal names. Best known is Shri, meaning opulence, fortune, beauty, or indicating the goddess Lakshmi, and in Gaudiya esotericism. In the higher advanced teachings of pure devotional service to Krishna, it refers to Sri Radha. Shri may prefix names of males or females, but in modern colloquial Indian languages is normally used only for males. A purely feminine equivalent is Srimati, standard throughout nearly all of India as a prefix to names of married Hindu women. And in Gaudiya usage, it precedes the name of, or sometimes used alone as an epithet, as a title of Radharani. Sometimes Srimati Radharani, we say. Sometimes Srimati refers to Radharani, that's all. Although Shri is itself quite acceptable for honoring even the most respected individuals up to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, several standard variants are employed in this work. Shri Yuddha and Shri Yukta are common in formal Bengali as honorifics, often pertaining to secular rather than spiritual status. Andeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam, Shri Yuta. Shri Yuta means endowed with Shri, prosperity. Shri Yukta also means the same. But generally these are used in Bengal for secular purposes, non-devotional purposes, amongst those who are non-devotees. Srila is used by Gaudiyas for preeminent acharyas, and particularly within certain branches of the Saraswata Parampara for one's own guru. While Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was present, it was used occasionally to honor at least two of his prominent disciples. But in this book, it has been accorded only to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and recognized outstanding Gaudiya acharyas prevenient to him, who appeared prior to him. Shripad, and Srimad are used for sannyasis and other exalted devotees. Srimad is also rendered Srimad or Sriman according to Sanskrit grammatical rules. The Sriman Mahaprabhu. Sriman is a respectful address for a junior male. Srimad may also prefix the names of sacred books, as is often used with Bhagavad Gita and is standard before Bhagavatam. Sriman Mahaprabhu is a single word in Sanskrit. If it has to be written in the form of two, then it would be different. Conventions for naming Gaudiya Math personalities naturally changed when disciples of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati became gurus of the next generation. The disciples of some of these gurus refer to them as Srila, while others reserve this term solely for Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Thus, to a certain protocol appropriate for this book became puzzling and ticklish task. Not an easy task. Since it is not possible to maintain uniformity among the diverse standards, herein I have employed that which was current or considered proper at the time of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. An exception is made in referring to His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, by this title, by which he is internationally known to millions of followers and readers of his BBT publication. We pray that our contemporary Gaudiya compatriots, we pray that our fellow Gaudiya Vaishnavas will appreciate our attempt to preserve balance and propriety, appropriate etiquette in offering respect to our spiritual predecessors. Okay. Om Vishnu Pashi Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, during the period of his explaining the first words of Srimad Bhagavatam in Dhaka, which went on for a number of classes, at Rudradvip Gaudiya Math near Mayapur, the deity of Sri Gauranga, before whom Sri Siddhanta Saraswati performed Shatakoti Nama Yajna. Place is still there. When you're in Mayapur, you can go and offer obeisances unto these deities. This Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, before this deity, the Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur chanted 100 crore holy names. That means 192 rounds for almost 9 years. On the order of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Sri Sri Guru Gauranga Vinod Ananda Ji, Sri Gaudiya Math, Calcutta. Sri Sri Guru Gauranga Vinod Prana Ji, Sri Chaitanya Math, Mayapur. Sri Chaitanya Math, Vidvan, Mayapur. Sri Saraswati Thakur Samadhi, Sri Chaitanya Math, Mayapur. The deity of Sri Saraswati Thakur at his Samadhi. Sri Saraswati Thakur's shoes and cane, Brajas Swananda Sukhata Kunj, Radha Kund. Close up of his shoes. Okay. Already. Okay, fine. Let's stop with that. Any questions? Otherwise, we'll discuss on Telegram. The name of the place where Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati chanted 1 billion rounds, that was in Rajapattana. We'll come across it later on. The deity was shifted later on to the Rudradvip Gaudiya Math. That photograph was the photograph of the deity after he was shifted. But originally it was at Rajapatna. It was must have been now in the Chaitanya Math area. I don't remember whether it was in the Yogapeeth area. Okay. Anything else? Yes, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Prabhu, you were talking about
Leela Madhuri Mataji.
Yes, Prabhu. You were talking about misguidance by a senior devotee. At that time, if possible, we can correct them, or we should not follow that instruction. So once if we come across that kind of guidance, something, whatever he is telling, it is not going to help me to get progress in Krishna conscious. After that, our mind will not accept to continue to take the guidance from the same devotee. Is it right or wrong?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. So many times, those of us who have been brought up in joint families, so many times when our father or mother says something wrong, then the grandfather immediately tells the grandchild, no, that is wrong. So, you know, what your mother said is wrong. I have in my own life, I've come across that. And I was also told, in general, you should follow. But when something is wrong and we tell you it is wrong, then that as an exception, you should not follow.
So can we continue to take the guidance from the same devotee after that?
Well, if anything is right, something is right, what is wrong with that? Otherwise, there would be no, the entire Vedic system would collapse. Lord Brahma commits a mistake, but just because he commits a mistake doesn't mean that everyone stops following him. Later on, they follow. When he is correct, then you follow. When he is wrong, while he is wrong, you should not follow. While he is wrong and instructing you to do something wrong, you should not follow. That's all.
Okay.
That applies not only for spiritual mastery, it applies for all forms of authority. There are specifically certain types of authorities in Vedic culture. In Vedic culture, this is generally taught. Let me share this. Here is a famous list. One who cannot deliver his dependence from the path of repeated birth and death should never become a spiritual master. Guru, a relative, swajana, a father, pita, a husband. Where is a husband? I think that's included here. Pati. No, Pati is here. Mother, Janani, or a worshipable demigod, Daivam. The idea is that these are all representatives of Lord Vishnu. Representative of Lord Vishnu means when they repeat an instruction coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then that instruction should be considered to be coming from the Supreme Lord himself. I'll say that again. When they repeat an instruction coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then that instruction should be considered to be directly coming from the Supreme Lord. In other words, let us say a spiritual master. Through the disciplic line, Krishna's instructions are coming. And when he tells his disciple, you must chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, minimum this 16 rounds. That instruction is coming from Prabhupada, which is ultimately the instruction to chant the Hare Krishna mantra with the determination to chant a fixed number of rounds. That is coming from the Goswamis. Ultimately, it's coming from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is the Supreme Personality of God. Or when you are instructed, you must execute devotional service in its pure form. That instruction is coming from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So when my spiritual master tells that to me, when I meet him for some purpose, I should understand that no, this is Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, through my spiritual master, directly instructing me this. So that is how we understand. Similarly, a father, a mother, a husband, when they repeat an instruction from Krishna, coming through the discipline, that's there. But when they convey the teachings of Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavatam is entirely Krishna's instruction. Bhagavad Gita, entirely Krishna's instruction. When they give that, that should be accepted as Krishna's own instruction. This is a basic principle. Acharya Devo Bhava, Matri Devo Bhava, Pitri Devo Bhava. Elementary principles are in Vedic culture. Demigods are also Vaishnavas. They're also Vaishnavas. So when they give an instruction that is in line with pure devotion service, that must be accepted. So anything for those who are seeking pure devotion service unto the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, when any instruction is coming from them, any of these specific personalities, these are God's representatives. That's the meaning of God's representative. When they say that, you must consider, oh no, Krishna has told me this. The Supreme Lord Krishna has personally told me this. That is something we should always remember, not easily neglected. Remember, it's not just a spiritual master, but there's so many others. Here, husband, mother, they're all there. They're also God's representatives. Similarly, an uninvited guest, Atithi. Of course, Manu Samhita describes who is fit to come under the category of Atithi. It's not just anyone. Actually, Baladev Yogushan says Atithi refers to an exalted Vaishnava who has no attraction for anything, even a place of residence. Very exalted explanation. So the principle is when they give some wrong instruction, that should be discarded. Only when they give some wrong instruction, that should be discarded. Not that you start blacklisting the individual, not like that. Only that means in that status should not listen. But when the same person,
yes, thank you, sir.
Okay, Asita Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dhanvat Pranam. Thanks a lot for such a glorious, wonderful explanation of the things, Prabhu. Prabhu, I had a doubt about when you mentioned that the first 3 verses of Nectar of Instruction, as what Bhakti Vinod Thakur says, refers to Shraddha platform.
No,
and the next 3 verses refers to...
No. Bhakti Vinod Thakur does not say that.
Bhakti Alok, you're mentioning it?
No, but Bhakti Vinod Thakur doesn't say that. Bhakti Vinod Thakur doesn't say that.
Okay, so, but you are mentioning about that...
But if you examine the standard explanation about Shraddha, as presented in Bhakti Sandarbha by Jiva Goswami, it matches with what is called Sharanapatti or Sharanagati. And Bhakti Vinod Thakur has remarked that the first 2 verses talk about that which is unfavorable, and the 3rd verse talks about that which is favorable. And he has stated that the first 3 verses are not even talking about Sakshat Bhakti, but they are preliminary to devotional service. They prepare us, because Sharanagati only prepares you to engage in pure bhakti. That he has stated in his commentary to Upadeshamrita. Okay, Shailesh.
Hi, Krishna Prabhu. Sorry, I had a weak internet connection, so I missed a little bit of the explanation you gave about the sastric use of Shri and Srimati compared to the colloquial use. If you could just clarify that again, because I know colloquially it's somewhat interchangeable nowadays, Shri and Srimati. Well, not, obviously she's not Srimati, but Shri can be for both.
Srimati is used only for women.
Yeah.
Shri is conventionally used for men.
But in sastric purpose,
obviously.
from a sastric
Shri by itself can be used for men and women. Shri Radha, Krishna Pada.
Yeah, because deity is always Shri, so yeah.
Yeah, but it's just been a convention too. I think it's probably to distinguish between respectable men and respectable women.
Okay, so when we refer to the deities, I mean, if Shri is reference to Lakshmi, why would reference to Krishna or Narayan be given a prefix of Shri?
I don't understand your question.
So deities are always referred to in with respect as Shri meaning Lakshmi ji.
Shri can, one meaning of Shri is prosperous. Another meaning of Shri is prosperity. And Shri also happens to be a proper noun. Shri is also a name of a person. And that person is Lakshmi. So it has many meanings. So Shri Krishna refers to the respectable, prosperous Krishna.
Okay, so the reference there isn't back to Lakshmi ji. It's a honorary title only. It's not a reference back to Lakshmi.
Honorific. Yeah, it's an honorific.
Okay, sorry for repeating that. I missed the original. Okay, Hare Krishna.
Anything else? Otherwise, we can close up. All right. Manchakalpadurvya Shikapasandhya Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha.